The December wind cut through my jacket like a blade as I stood outside the rental car, gift bags weighing down both arms. 3 months in Germany had been worth every sleepless night and every conference call at 2 a.m. The software architecture project was finally complete, the client was happy, and my bank account was significantly healthier. More importantly, I was home for Christmas. I hadn't told Sarah I was coming back early. The original plan had me flying in on Christmas Eve, but I'd managed to wrap everything up 3 days ahead of schedule. The surprise would be perfect. Her parents loved grand gestures, and showing up unannounced with expensive gifts would earn me serious points with the in-laws. The Hendersons' house glowed with warm light, every window draped in tasteful white Christmas lights. Cars lined the circular driveway. Apparently the family Christmas party was already in full swing. Perfect timing. I could make my entrance, play the devoted husband returning from his business trip, and watch Sarah's face light up. I fumbled for my keys, then remembered Sarah had mentioned her parents changed the locks after the break-in scare last month. No problem. I knew where they kept the spare key, hidden behind the fake rock near the rose bushes. Some things never changed in suburbia. The front door opened silently. Warm air rushed out, carrying the scent of cinnamon and pine. Voices drifted from the living room, Sarah's laugh, her mother's distinctive giggle, and several others I couldn't immediately identify. I set the bags down quietly in the foyer, planning to surprise them all at once. That's when I heard it. "I'm 3 weeks pregnant," Sarah's voice rang out, crystal clear and absolutely delighted. "And yes, it's my boss's baby. I'm actually happy about it. I've never felt this sure about anything in my life." The world tilted sideways. I stood frozen in the marble foyer, gift bags at my feet, listening to my wife of 7 years confess to carrying another man's child. The conversation continued, but the words became white noise. Her mother's shocked gasp, someone asking if she was sure. Sarah's breathless confirmation that yes, she was certain, and no, her husband had no idea. My legs moved without conscious thought, backing me toward the door. My hands found the bags, lifted them silently, and carried them back to the rental car. I drove for 2 hours without destination, finally stopping at a roadside motel that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. The room was small and clean enough. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the gift bags like evidence from a crime scene. The perfume I'd bought her in Munich, the bracelet from that little shop in Berlin, the chocolate for her mother, the whiskey for her father, all of it meaningless now. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our text messages from the past 3 months. Her sweet good morning texts, her complaints about missing me, her updates about work and family. All lies, apparently. Or at least, not the whole truth. The boss she'd mentioned, Richard Blackwood, senior partner at Morrison, Blackwood and Associates. I'd met him at the firm's summer barbecue, tall, confident, the kind of man who wore expensive suits like armor and treated everyone else like they were auditioning for his approval. Sarah had laughed at his jokes a little too loudly that day, but I'd dismissed it as professional courtesy. How long had this been going on? How many of those late nights at the office were actually spent in hotel rooms? How many of her friends knew? How many people had been looking at me with pity while I worked 16-hour days in another country, believing I was building a future for my wife and myself? Sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, it was filled with dreams of laughter and whispered confessions, of gift bags that turned to ash in my hands. I woke up with a plan. The next morning, I called Sarah from the motel parking lot. My voice sounded normal in my own ears. Tired from travel, but normal. "Honey?" Her voice was bright, cheerful, with no trace of guilt. "How's Frankfurt? Are you still on track to come home on Christmas Eve?" "Actually, I might be able to wrap things up a day or two early," I said, watching a family load suitcases into their minivan. "The client is happy with the preliminary results. I'm hoping to surprise you." "That would be wonderful. I miss you so much. The house feels empty without you." The lie came so easily to her. I wondered if she was alone, or if Richard was there, listening to her performance. "How are things at the firm? Still working those long hours?" A brief pause. "You know how it is during the holidays. Everyone wants their cases wrapped up before the new year. Richard has us all pulling double shifts." "Richard." She said his name like it meant nothing, like he hadn't been inside her 3 weeks ago, creating the child she was apparently thrilled to be carrying. "Well, don't work too hard. I want you rested when I get back." "I will. I love you, David." "Love you too?" The call ended. I sat in the parking lot for another 10 minutes, processing the conversation. She was good at this. Really good. If I hadn't overheard her confession, I would never have suspected anything, but I had heard it, and now I needed to figure out what to do about it. I drove back to our house. My house, technically, since I'd bought it before we married and never added her name to the deed. A small mercy I hadn't thought much about until now. The spare key was still hidden under the fake rock by the front steps. Another thing that hadn't changed. Inside, everything looked normal. Sarah's coffee cup in the sink from that morning. Her laptop closed on the kitchen counter. Mail stacked neatly on the hall table. But now I was looking with different eyes, searching for evidence of the affair I knew was happening. It didn't take long to find it. In her nightstand drawer, underneath a stack of magazines, was a second phone. A cheap, prepaid model that definitely wasn't her usual iPhone. The message history was a goldmine of information I wasn't sure I wanted to read, but couldn't stop myself from consuming. 3 months of messages. Starting just after I'd left for Germany. Richard's messages were confident, demanding. Sarah's responses were eager, submissive in a way that made my stomach turn. They had pet names for each other, inside jokes, detailed descriptions of encounters that had happened in our bed, in his office, in hotel rooms across the city. The most recent message was from yesterday. Can't wait to tell everyone about the baby. This changes everything. Sarah's response, I know, I'm scared but excited. David will never suspect. I photographed everything with my own phone, then put the burner back exactly where I'd found it. Evidence collected. Now I needed a plan for what to do with it. My first instinct was confrontation. Storm into her office, throw the phone on her desk, demand answers and apologies. But that would give her time to prepare, to spin the story, to make me the villain somehow. I'd seen Sarah talk her way out of trouble before. She was a paralegal for a reason. She understood how to manipulate facts and emotions to create the narrative she wanted. No, confrontation wasn't the answer. At least not yet. I called my lawyer instead. Marcus Chen had handled the house purchase and our wills. He was discreet, thorough, and had no love for cheating spouses after his own messy divorce 3 years earlier. David, good to hear from you. How's Germany treating you? Actually, I'm back in town. Marcus, I need to see you, today, if possible. It's about Sarah. The tone of my voice must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation. Of course. Can you be here in an hour? Marcus's office was downtown, in one of those glass towers that made everything look important and expensive. He listened without interruption as I told him about the overheard conversation and the burner phone. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. First question, do you want to try to save the marriage? She's pregnant with another man's child, Marcus. She's been lying to me for months. What exactly would I be saving? He nodded. Fair enough. Second question, how do you want to handle this? Quiet divorce, or do you want to make some noise? I thought about Sarah's delighted confession, about Richard's smug confidence, about all the people who probably knew and said nothing while I worked myself to exhaustion in another country. I want them to face consequences, both of them. Marcus smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Then we need to be very careful about how we proceed. Richard Blackwood isn't just Sarah's boss. He's a senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms. He has resources and connections, but he also has vulnerabilities. What kind of vulnerabilities? The kind that come with sleeping with subordinates and potentially using his position to coerce sexual relationships. The kind that law firms take very seriously when they become public knowledge. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Not quite anger, not quite satisfaction. Something harder and more focused. What do you need from me? More evidence, documentation, witnesses if possible. And most importantly, we need to make sure everything we do is completely legal. Richard will try to destroy you if he gets the chance. We can't give him any ammunition. I left Marcus's office with a list of tasks and a timeline. Phase 1 was information gathering, Phase 2 was documentation, Phase 3 was execution. Sarah had no idea what was coming. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I played the role of loving husband while systematically documenting my wife's affair. I came home from Germany on schedule, bearing gifts and stories about my successful project. Sarah welcomed me back with enthusiasm that might have been genuine if I didn't know about Richard. She was good at compartmentalizing. During the day, she was the perfect wife, cooking my favorite meals, asking about my work, making plans for the holidays. At night, she was responsive and affectionate in bed. If I hadn't heard her confession, I might never have suspected anything, but I had heard it. And now I was watching her performance with clinical detachment, cataloging every lie and misdirection. She was still working late most nights, still taking mysterious phone calls that she stepped outside to answer, still carrying that second phone, though she was more careful about hiding it now. I used a small camera Marcus had recommended to document her retrieving it from various hiding places around the house. The evidence was building. Photos of the burner phone, screenshots of text messages, a detailed log of her whereabouts and lies about where she'd been. Marcus had also hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Janet Morrison, who specialized in domestic cases. Janet's reports were thorough and damning. Sarah and Richard were meeting at the Riverside Hotel every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. They'd been seen together at restaurants outside the city, where they were less likely to encounter people they knew. Richard had been paying for everything: hotels, dinners, gifts. He'd even bought Sarah a necklace that she'd claimed was a Christmas bonus from the firm. The most interesting discovery came when Janet started looking into Richard himself. He wasn't just cheating with Sarah. There were at least 2 other women at the firm who'd been involved with him over the past year. One had left suddenly in September after filing a complaint with HR that was mysteriously withdrawn. Another had been transferred to the firm's satellite office in another state. "He's got a pattern," Janet explained during one of our meetings. "Targets younger women in subordinate positions, uses his authority to initiate relationships, then discards them when he gets bored or when they become inconvenient. Sarah might think she's special, but she's just the latest in a series." That information hurt more than I'd expected. Not because I still loved Sarah. That feeling had died in the Hendersons' foyer, but because it made her seem so naive, so easily manipulated. The woman I'd married was smart and ambitious. How had she fallen for such an obvious predator? The answer came during a conversation with her sister Lisa, who called while Sarah was at one of her late work sessions. "David, can I ask you something? Is everything okay with Sarah? She's been acting strange lately. Different. Different how? More confident, I guess. Like she's got a secret that makes her feel superior to everyone else, and she's been asking weird questions about divorce laws and prenups. I told her she was being ridiculous. You two are solid." But she just smiled and changed the subject. After that conversation, I understood. Sarah wasn't naive. She was calculating. This wasn't a romantic affair that had gotten out of hand. This was a planned exit strategy. She was using Richard to level up her life, and she was planning to discard me once she'd secured her position with him. The pregnancy was the final piece of her plan. Once she had Richard's child, she'd have leverage over him, a permanent connection to his money and status. She could divorce me, take half of whatever assets she could claim, and move on to her new life as the mistress-turned-wife of a successful lawyer. It was actually impressive, in a sociopathic way. But Sarah had made one crucial error in her planning. She'd assumed I was too trusting and too busy to notice what was happening. She'd underestimated me. That was going to cost her everything. Marcus and I finalized our strategy during a meeting the week before Christmas. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would let Sarah make the first move, let her ask for the divorce she was obviously planning, and then we would respond with overwhelming force. "The key is timing," Marcus explained. "We wait until she's committed to her course of action. Then we hit them both with everything at once. The affair documentation goes to the law firm's ethics board. The evidence of Richard's pattern of behavior goes to the State Bar Association. And Sarah gets divorce papers that leave her with exactly what she brought to the marriage: nothing." "What about the baby?" "Not your problem. She can work out child support with Richard, assuming he still has a career after this comes out." I felt that cold, sharp feeling in my chest again. It was growing stronger, more focused. I was beginning to understand why people talked about revenge being a dish best served cold. The waiting, the planning, the careful documentation, it all made the eventual payoff more satisfying. Sarah had chosen her path. Now she was going to live with the consequences. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Sarah approached me 3 days before Christmas while I was wrapping presents in the living room. "David, we need to talk." Her tone was serious, rehearsed. This was it, the conversation she'd been planning for weeks. "Sure, what's on your mind?" She sat down across from me, hands folded in her lap. "I've been doing some thinking while you were away. About us, about our marriage, about what I want for the future." I kept rapping, not looking up. "Okay. I think we've grown apart. We want different things. You're always traveling for work, and I'm building my career at the firm. We barely see each other anymore." "Is this going somewhere specific, Sarah?" She took a breath. "I think we should consider separation. Maybe divorce. I know it's not what either of us planned, but I think it might be best for both of us." I set down the roll of wrapping paper and looked at her directly. "Is there someone else?" The question caught her off guard. She'd probably planned for anger, for pleading, for attempts to save the marriage. She hadn't expected calm, direct questioning. No. This isn't about someone else. This is about us." "Are you sure? Because if there's someone else, I'd rather know now than find out later." "David, I swear to you, this is just about us growing apart." I nodded slowly. "Okay, if that's what you want, I won't fight you on it. We can call Marcus after the holidays and start the paperwork." She blinked, clearly surprised by how easily I was accepting this. "Really? You're not going to try to talk me out of it?" "Sarah, if you're not happy, then staying married isn't good for either of us. I want you to be happy." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you for understanding. I was afraid this would be much harder. No point in making things harder than they need to be." She leaned forward and kissed my cheek. "You're a good man, David. I hope we can still be friends after this is all settled." "Of course." That night, she went to bed early, claiming exhaustion. I stayed up late, making phone calls, to Marcus, to Janet, to a contact at the State Bar Association that Marcus had connected me with. Everything was in motion now. Sarah had made her choice, publicly and clearly. Now it was time for the consequences. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day making final preparations. Marcus filed the divorce papers, but we held off on serving them. Janet delivered her complete report, including photographs and witness statements. The contact at the State Bar Association confirmed they were ready to open an investigation into Richard's conduct as soon as we provided the evidence. Everything was ready. We just needed the right moment for maximum impact. That moment came on Christmas Eve at the Henderson family party. The Henderson family Christmas party was an annual tradition that Sarah took very seriously. Her parents spared no expense: catered food, professional decorations, an open bar that would make a country club jealous. The guest list included extended family, family friends, and several of Sarah's colleagues from the law firm, including Richard Blackwood. I arrived fashionably late, carrying a bottle of expensive wine and wearing my best suit. Sarah was already there, radiant in a red dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. She was holding court near the fireplace, surrounded by her cousins and their wives, telling some story that had them all laughing. Richard was across the room, talking to Sarah's father about golf. He looked every inch the successful lawyer. Perfectly tailored suit, confident posture, the kind of smile that suggested he owned everything he was looking at. Neither of them seemed particularly concerned about my presence. Why would they be? As far as they knew, I was the oblivious husband who'd accepted his wife's request for divorce without question. I was no threat to their carefully laid plans. That was about to change. "David," Sarah's mother, Patricia, swept over to greet me with air kisses and the scent of expensive perfume. "So good to see you. Sarah told us about your decision to separate. I'm so sorry, dear. These things happen." "Thank you, Patricia. I appreciate your understanding." "Of course. We'll always think of you as family." The condescension in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Poor David. Too boring to keep his exciting wife interested. It was probably for the best that Sarah was moving on to someone more suitable. I made my way around the room, accepting sympathy and well wishes from people who clearly thought they knew the whole story. Sarah's cousin Jennifer was particularly effusive in her support. "I think you're handling this so maturely, David. Not every man would be so understanding about Sarah's situation." "Her situation?" Jennifer's eyes widened slightly, as if she'd said something she shouldn't have. "I just meant the divorce. It must be difficult." But her expression suggested she meant something else entirely, something she assumed I already knew about. I excused myself and found a quiet corner where I could observe the room. Sarah and Richard were being careful not to interact too obviously, but there were subtle signs of their relationship. The way his eyes followed her when she moved, the way she positioned herself so she could see him without appearing to look, the brief smile they exchanged when they thought no one was watching. Several of Sarah's colleagues from the firm were there, and I noticed they kept glancing between Sarah and Richard, with expressions that ranged from knowing to disapproving. This affair wasn't as secret as they thought it was. Half the room probably knew what was going on, which made my next move even more satisfying. I waited until after dinner, when everyone was gathered in the living room with drinks and dessert. Patricia was in the middle of a toast about family and new beginnings when I stood up. "If I could say something," I announced, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "I know this is unusual, but I have something I'd like to share with everyone." Sarah looked surprised, but not alarmed. She probably thought I was going to make some gracious speech about our amicable separation and mutual respect. "As most of you know, Sarah and I have decided to divorce. What you might not know is the reason for that decision." Now Sarah looked concerned. Richard had gone very still, his glass halfway to his lips. 3 weeks ago, I came home early from my business trip. I wanted to surprise Sarah by showing up to this party unexpectedly. Instead, I overheard her telling someone that she was 3 weeks pregnant with her boss's baby. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the Persian rug. At first, I was devastated. But then I realized this was actually a blessing. Better to find out now than after the child was born. Better to know the truth than to live a lie. Sarah had gone white. Richard was staring at me with an expression of pure hatred. So I want to thank Sarah for being honest about her feelings, even if she wasn't honest with me directly. And I want to thank Richard Blackwood for showing me exactly what kind of woman I married. Patricia Henderson dropped her wine glass. The sound of crystal shattering on the hardwood floor seemed to break the spell of silence that had fallen over the room. "David, what are you saying?" Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm saying your daughter has been having an affair with her married boss for the past 3 months. I'm saying she's carrying his child. And I'm saying that's why she asked me for a divorce. Not because we grew apart, but because she wanted to upgrade to a richer man." The explosion of voices that followed was everything I'd hoped for. Sarah's family members shouting questions and accusations. Richard's wife, who I hadn't noticed was there until she started screaming at him, demanding explanations. Several of the law firm colleagues backing away from both Sarah and Richard as if they had a contagious disease. In the center of it all, Sarah was trying to deny everything while simultaneously looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Richard was attempting to leave, but his wife was blocking his path, still screaming about lies and betrayal, and how she'd suspected something was wrong. I stood in the eye of the storm, calm and satisfied, watching my wife's carefully constructed plans crumble in real time. Sarah finally managed to push through the crowd to reach me. Her face was streaked with tears, her perfect makeup ruined. "How could you do this?" she hissed. "How could you humiliate me like this in front of my family?" "I didn't humiliate you, Sarah. You did that all by yourself. I just made sure everyone knew the truth." "You bastard! You vindictive bastard!" "Probably, but I'm not a liar and I'm not a cheater. That makes me better than you." She raised her hand as if to slap me, but I caught her wrist. "I wouldn't if I were you, not in front of all these witnesses." The look in her eyes was pure hatred. Good. Now she knew how I'd felt for the past 3 weeks. Richard finally managed to extract himself from his wife's verbal assault and approached us. His face was flushed, his perfect composure completely shattered. "You have no idea what you've just done," he said quietly. "No idea who you're messing with. Actually, I know exactly who I'm messing with. A predator who uses his position to coerce women into sleeping with him, a man who's about to lose everything he's worked for." "You can't prove anything," I smiled. "Actually, I can. And tomorrow, the State Bar Association is going to get a very detailed report about your conduct with female employees, including photos, text messages, and witness statements from at least 3 women you've victimized." The color drained from his face. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Ask Jennifer Martinez why she really left the firm in September. Ask Amanda Foster why she requested a transfer to the Portland office. Ask Sarah about the burner phone she keeps in her nightstand drawer." Richard looked like he was going to be sick. The party was effectively over. Guests were making hurried excuses and heading for the door. Sarah's family was huddled in shocked conversation. Richard's wife had stormed out, presumably to call her own lawyer. I found Patricia Henderson in the kitchen, cleaning up broken glass with shaking hands. "I'm sorry it happened this way," I told her, "but I thought you deserved to know the truth about your daughter." She looked up at me with eyes full of tears. "Is it true? All of it?" "Every word." She nodded slowly. "I raised her better than this. I don't know where I went wrong." "You didn't go wrong, Patricia. Sarah made her own choices." I left the Henderson house that night feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The first phase of my revenge was complete. Sarah's reputation with her family was destroyed. Richard's marriage was over. Their affair was public knowledge among everyone who mattered in their professional and social circles. But I wasn't done yet. The real consequences were still coming. The day after Christmas, Marcus and I met at his office to execute the next phase of our plan. The divorce papers were served to Sarah at her parents' house, where she'd apparently taken refuge after the disaster of the Christmas party. The process server reported that she'd screamed at him and tried to refuse the documents, but he'd managed to complete service according to legal requirements. The papers were comprehensive and brutal. Since we'd married after I'd already purchased the house and established my career, and since we'd never had children together, Sarah was entitled to very little under state law. The prenup we'd signed, which she'd dismissed as a formality at the time, protected most of my assets. She would get half of the money we'd saved during the marriage, which amounted to about $15,000, and she could keep her personal belongings and her car. Everything else, the house, my retirement accounts, my investment portfolio, even the furniture we'd bought together, stayed with me. But the divorce was just the beginning. The real damage was about to come from the professional consequences of her affair. Janet Morrison had done excellent work documenting Richard's pattern of behavior with female employees. The report she'd compiled was 47 pages long and included testimony from 5 different women who'd been subjected to his advances over the past 3 years. 2 had been fired after refusing him. 1 had been demoted. 1 had accepted a transfer rather than continue working in the same office. And Sarah had been promoted twice in the past year, despite having less experience than several other candidates. The State Bar Association took the report very seriously. Within 48 hours of receiving it, they'd opened a formal investigation into Richard's conduct. The law firm, faced with potential liability for enabling a hostile work environment, immediately suspended Richard pending the outcome of the investigation. The local legal community was small and gossipy. Within a week, everyone knew why Richard had been suspended. His reputation was destroyed. Other firms wouldn't touch him. Clients were requesting new representation. His wife had filed for divorce and was seeking half of everything he owned, plus substantial alimony. Sarah, meanwhile, was facing her own professional consequences. The firm couldn't fire her for being pregnant, but they could certainly make her life difficult. Her access to important cases was revoked. Her office was moved to a smaller space in the basement. Her colleagues, many of whom had lost respect for her after the affair became public, stopped including her in meetings and social events. She tried to fight back, of course. She called me repeatedly, alternating between threats and pleas for mercy. She hired her own lawyer and attempted to challenge the divorce settlement. She even tried to claim that I'd been abusive and that the affair had been her way of escaping an unhealthy marriage. None of it worked. Marcus had been thorough in his preparation. Every document was legally sound. Every piece of evidence was properly obtained. Every witness was credible and willing to testify. The final blow came when the State Bar Association completed their investigation. Richard was disbarred for professional misconduct. The law firm, facing multiple lawsuits from his victims, settled out of court for undisclosed amounts and implemented new policies for handling sexual harassment complaints. Richard's career was over. His marriage was over. His reputation was destroyed. He was facing bankruptcy from the legal fees and settlement costs. Sarah, meanwhile, was unemployed. No other law firm in the city would hire her after the scandal. She was pregnant with the child of a disbarred lawyer who had no income and no prospects. Her family had largely cut her off after the humiliation of the Christmas party. Her friends had abandoned her when the affair became public knowledge. Sarah's belly was swollen under a thrift store maternity dress when I spotted her in the courthouse corridor. The fluorescent lights made her skin look sallow, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. She leaned against the wall for support, one hand cradling the weight of the baby that wasn't mine. Her public defender, a harried young woman clutching a battered briefcase, stood awkwardly nearby, pretending to review files. The judge had just signed our divorce decree 20 minutes earlier. No fault, clean split. I kept the house, she'd never wanted the mortgage anyway, the 401k, and the dog. She kept her clothes, her car note, and the consequences. She saw me and pushed off the wall, waddling over with the careful gait of someone 7 months along. "David," she said, voice cracking. "Please, just 5 minutes." I stopped. Around us, strangers shuffled past, bailiffs, attorneys, other broken couples waiting their turn under the gavel. "I heard about Richard," I said flatly. Her face crumpled. "He lost everything in the divorce. His wife took the house, the savings, even the boat. He's stocking shelves at night to pay rent on a studio in Oakwood. He can't give me a dime, David. Not child support, not even help with diapers." "That's rough," I said. "But you knew he was married when you started." "I know." Tears welled. "I know I destroyed everything. I know I hurt you worse than anyone ever should. But this baby? I'm terrified. I'm living in Mom's spare room. I lost my job when they found out I was pregnant. I have nothing." She reached for my arm. I stepped back. "I'm begging you," she whispered. "A loan. Anything. I'll pay you back. I just need to get through the first year." I studied her. The woman who once planned destination weddings with me, who laughed at my terrible cooking, who promised forever in front of 200 guests. That woman had vanished somewhere between late-night texts with Richard and the day she packed her suitcase while I was at work. "You want me to finance the life you chose over ours?" "Not forever, just until I'm on my feet." "No." The public defender cleared her throat, sensing the conversation wasn't going her way either. Sarah's voice rose, desperate. "You're doing well. You kept the house. You got the promotion last month. I saw on LinkedIn. You can afford to help?" "I can afford to," I agreed. "But I won't." Her tears spilled over. "How can you be so cold?" "I'm not cold, Sarah. I'm clear. There's a difference." I started to walk away. She called after me, voice echoing down the marble hallway. "I said I was sorry. I've lost everything. Isn't that enough punishment?" I turned back one last time. Punishment? This isn't about punishment. It's about boundaries. You drew the line when you decided our marriage was disposable. I'm just standing on the other side of it. Her sobs followed me to the elevator. I didn't flinch. Outside, winter sunlight glinted off the courthouse steps. I breathed in cold air that tasted like freedom. 6 months later, I heard updates through mutual friends who still felt obligated to report. Sarah delivered a healthy boy in March. Richard showed up drunk to the hospital, made a scene in the maternity ward, then disappeared again. He missed the paternity hearing. The judge ordered wage garnishment on paychecks that barely existed. Sarah moved into subsidized housing. She worked part-time at a coffee shop, pushing a stroller to the bus stop at 5 a.m. for the early shift. Her mother watched the baby when she could. Some nights, apparently, she sat alone in a cramped apartment, scrolling through old photos of our life together. Vacations in Napa, the dog's first Christmas, the house we'd painted room by room. Friends said she cried when she saw my new profile picture. Me standing on a beach in Costa Rica with a woman whose smile looked genuine. I didn't block her on social media. I didn't need to. The distance between us was measured in more than miles. One evening in July, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened it to find Sarah on the porch, thinner than before, hair pulled back in a tired ponytail. The baby, 4 months old now, was asleep in a carrier against her chest. I didn't come to ask for money, she said quickly, reading my expression. Then why are you here? I start nursing school in the fall. Financial aid, scholarships, night classes. It's going to be brutal, but I'm doing it. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to fix things. For him. She glanced down at the sleeping infant. I nodded. Good. She shifted the carrier's weight. I rehearse apologies in my head every day. I know none of them are enough. But I am sorry, David. For all of it. I believe you. Silence stretched between us, filled with cicadas and distant traffic. I forgave you a long time ago, I said finally. Not for your sake, for mine. Holding on to anger was heavier than letting go. Her eyes filled again. Thank you for that. But forgiveness doesn't mean trust, and it doesn't mean I owe you anything. I know. She turned to leave, then paused. Do you ever think about what might have been? Sometimes, I admitted, but not the way you think. I think about how close I came to staying with someone who didn't value me, and I'm grateful I got out. Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing the blow. At the bottom of the steps, she looked back one last time. You deserved better than what I gave you. Yes, I said. I did. She walked to her dented Civic, secured the baby in the car seat, and drove away. I closed the door, poured a glass of wine, and stepped onto the back deck. The same deck where we'd hosted engagement parties, birthday barbecues, lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers. The house felt different now, lighter. I'd repainted the bedroom, replaced the mattress, planted new flowers along the walk. Every change a quiet declaration. This is mine now. My phone buzzed. A text from Elena, the woman from Costa Rica now visiting family in Chicago but planning to return next month. Dinner when I'm back? I make killer empanadas. I smiled. Can't wait. I set the phone down and watched fireflies blink across the yard. Sarah was building a new life from the ashes of the old one. It would be hard, maybe harder than she could imagine. But it was hers to build, and I was building mine. Some choices close doors forever. Others open windows you never knew existed. I chose the window. And the view, finally, truly, was beautiful. 6 months after the Christmas party that destroyed Sarah's life, I was sitting in my backyard, enjoying a beer and the early summer evening. The house felt different now, cleaner somehow, like a weight had been lifted from every room. I'd redecorated the bedroom, bought new furniture for the living room, turned Sarah's old office into a home gym. It was a good life, quiet, peaceful, honest. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. David? It's Jennifer, Sarah's cousin. I remembered Jennifer from the Christmas party. She'd been one of the people offering me sympathy for my difficult situation. Hello, Jennifer. What can I do for you? I wanted to let you know. Sarah had the baby last week. A little girl. Congratulations to her. David, she's in a really bad place. She's living in a 1-bedroom apartment in the worst part of town. She's on welfare. Richard hasn't paid a dime of child support. He can't. He barely has enough money to feed himself. She's all alone with this baby and no support system. I'm sorry to hear that. I know what she did was wrong, but she's family, and I hate seeing her like this. I was wondering, could you maybe help her out? Just a little? She doesn't have anyone else. I took a sip of my beer and watched a cardinal land on the fence. Jennifer, let me ask you something. At the Christmas party, you said I was handling Sarah's situation maturely. What did you mean by that? Silence on the other end of the line. You knew about the affair, didn't you? You knew she was cheating on me while I was working in Germany. David, it wasn't my place to say anything. So you knew my wife was betraying me, and you said nothing. You let me walk around like a fool while everyone whispered behind my back. And now you want me to help her? She's learned her lesson. She's paid for what she did. Has she? Because from what I can tell, she's experiencing the natural consequences of her actions. She chose to cheat on her husband with her boss. She chose to get pregnant by a married man. She chose to plan her exit from our marriage based on money and status rather than love or commitment. Now she's living with the results of those choices. But the baby didn't choose any of this. No, she didn't. But that's Sarah's responsibility, not mine. Sarah created this situation. Sarah needs to figure out how to handle it. So you won't help at all? I won't enable her. There's a difference. Jennifer hung up without saying goodbye. I finished my beer and went inside to make dinner. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Marcus. Sarah was trying to challenge the divorce settlement again, claiming she'd been coerced into signing the agreement. Her new lawyer, apparently she'd found someone willing to work for free, was arguing that the emotional distress of the affair's exposure had compromised her ability to make rational decisions. It's a desperate move, Marcus explained. She has no real grounds for appeal, but she's hoping to pressure you into a settlement rather than go through another court battle. What do you recommend? Fight it. We have everything documented. The settlement was fair according to state law and the prenup she signed voluntarily. If we give in now, she'll keep coming back for more. Then we fight. The hearing was scheduled for August. Sarah's lawyer presented her case, that she'd been emotionally manipulated and publicly humiliated, that the divorce settlement was punitive rather than equitable, that she deserved spousal support given her current circumstances. Marcus methodically destroyed every argument. He presented evidence of Sarah's careful planning of the affair and her calculated approach to the divorce. He showed that the settlement was exactly what state law required and that the prenup she was trying to challenge had been reviewed by her own lawyer before she signed it. He demonstrated that her current circumstances were the direct result of her own professional misconduct, not any action I had taken. The judge was not sympathetic to Sarah's arguments. Mrs. Carter, he said, you engaged in a deliberate course of conduct that destroyed your marriage and your professional reputation. The court is not in the business of protecting people from the consequences of their own actions. Your motion is denied. As we left the courthouse, Sarah tried one last appeal. David, please, I know you hate me, but I'm desperate. I can't take care of Emma on my own. I'm barely surviving. You should have thought about that before you decided to blow up your life for a man who was never going to leave his wife for you. I was stupid. I was selfish. I know that now. But I'm begging you, not for me, but for an innocent child who doesn't deserve to suffer because of my mistakes. You're right. Emma doesn't deserve to suffer, but that's your job to fix, not mine. You're her mother. Figure it out. How? I can't get a job anywhere in this city. No one will hire me. I have no money, no family support, no options. Then maybe you should consider moving somewhere else, starting over. There are other cities, other opportunities. But whatever you do, you'll be doing it without my help. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact moment when she finally understood that I was never going to save her, that the man she'd betrayed was gone forever, replaced by someone harder and less forgiving. I loved you, she said quietly. I know you don't believe that, but I did love you. I thought I could have both. I thought I could keep you as my safety net while I explored something more exciting. That wasn't love, Sarah. That was selfishness. If you'd loved me, you would have talked to me about whatever was missing in our marriage. You would have given us a chance to fix things. Instead, you decided to lie and cheat and plan your exit strategy while I was working to build our future. I know I was wrong. But David, I'm scared. I don't know how to do this alone. For just a moment, I felt an echo of the sympathy I'd once felt for her. But it passed quickly, replaced by the memory of her delighted confession about carrying another man's child. You should have thought about that 3 weeks before you decided to get pregnant by your boss. I walked away from her for the final time, leaving her standing alone in the courthouse parking lot with her baby and her regrets. That night, I called my sister in California. How would you feel about having a house guest for a few weeks? I asked. I'm thinking about taking some time off, maybe doing some traveling. Of course. What's the occasion? I just finished dealing with some unfinished business. Now I'm ready to start the next chapter. 3 days later, I was on a plane to San Diego, leaving behind the wreckage of my marriage and the woman who had destroyed it. I felt no guilt, no regret, no lingering sadness. Sarah had made her choices. She'd gambled everything on a man who was never worthy of the risk, and she'd lost. Now she was living with the consequences of that gamble, just as I was living with the consequences of my response to her betrayal. The difference was that my consequences were freedom, peace, and the satisfaction of justice served. Hers were poverty, isolation, and the knowledge that she'd thrown away a good life for a fantasy that had never been real. As the plane lifted off, I opened a book and began to read. Behind me, the city grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. Somewhere down there, Sarah was struggling to feed her baby and wondering how her carefully laid plans had gone so wrong. I didn't think about her again for the rest of the flight.